Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're watching us from. My name is Farron Kelly. I'm the Vice President at ESPN Wide World of Sports and also Vice President of Disney Water Parks here in Florida. I also serve as the Executive Champion for the Salute Bird here at Walt Disney World. Now, I myself am not a veteran, but rather I'm an ally. My appreciation for our men and women in uniform starts actually before I was born. My father was drafted and served in World War II in the police action right at the end of World War II as he went over to help in Germany. My aunt was a U.S. Army nurse that served in both World War II and Korea. And my uncle was actually a tail gunner on a B-29 Super Fortress that was shot down in the Pacific Theater. He was a POW, but fortunately he did return back home at the end of the war. Now, my reverence and respect for the military really converged with my job here at Disney in 2016, when I had the opportunity to be part of the team that hosted the Invictus Games at Wide World of Sports. It was really a life-changing experience to see how sports, something I'm very passionate about, could converge with and be used as a tool to help these wounded, ill, and injured servicemen and women recover and just give them a new purpose on life. It was truly an amazing experience, and I'm very, very pleased to say that we will be hosting the Department of Defense Warrior Games later this year, this September at Wide World of Sports. Now, during the Invictus Games, I was introduced to another concept within our company, another program, which is the Heroes Work Here program. This is a program that was started at the urging of Bob Iger. Heroes Work Here was actually launched in spring of 2012. Bob Iger at the Disney shareholders meeting announced this program with 4 very specific targeted goals. Number 1, how do we equip veterans to transition from their military careers to life as private citizens working for private corporations? So that was 1. Number 2, how do we teach companies and how do we encourage them to hire these incredibly skilled and capable folks coming out of the military? Then the third one was the Disney company needed to build a portfolio of relationships with all these nonprofits that were serving both veterans and military spouses. And how can we have Disney connect with those groups? And then finally, number 4 was kind of put your money where your mouth is. Hire veterans at the Walt Disney Company. Well, take us 9 years in the future where we are today. The program has done pretty well. A couple of the big things. One is a program called the Veterans Institute was developed and rolled out in conjunction with Disney Institute that went on the road and taught corporations best practices and how they could go about hiring veterans. And then the company itself, the Walt Disney Company, I'm very, very proud to say, has hired over 11,000 veterans since this program was launched. Just pause and think about that for a second. 11,000 veterans. And in fact, many of you probably on this seminar are part of that group. And it is exciting. But you know what? The work's not done yet. We have to keep going. Like any good program, it has to be sustainable. It has to be fueled. And I'm really excited where our company is right now. As many of you as cast members know, we just rolled out our 5th key. We're all familiar with the 4 keys, but that 5th key of diversity and inclusion. And quite often we think about diversity and inclusion as being a conversation about race or gender. But when you think about the goals of how we work through those things, it's really about understanding. Because many of the groups that sometimes get focused on with diversity and inclusion, they have commonalities and shared experiences that maybe many people in the general public can't relate to. Myself as a civilian, I don't understand what many of you went through in your service careers, whether you were deployed, whether you're domestic, no matter what that is. Those are things that I never went through. So it's important for me and for many people to understand them, to understand what are those unique circumstances you have. Disney's a storytelling company, and our veterans have many ways a common story because of the experiences they went through. It's your unique backstory. So one of the things that we've seen as a part of our company with both the Veterans Institute and the Heroes Work Here program is that as we hire these veterans, they tend to stay, whether it's with Disney or whoever their employer is, they tend to stay with that company longer. And I think you can draw a quick line of that. It's that loyalty. As your role in the military, it's that country above self. You're serving that greater organization. However, what's also interesting is maybe the downside of that country above self. As you get into a company, it's like, well, what do I do about self-promotion? How do I really put myself out there in order to get noticed to advance within the company? Because that's something you really haven't learned as you've gone along. And in fact, in the military, the system of advancement is very predictive. There's deliberate things, what you need to do, the steps you need to do to advance. And I could say in the Walt Disney Company, it's not always that clean and clear. So that brings us to where we are today. And I'm very, very excited to now introduce our guest speaker for today. Lita Citroen is, I'm just going to say she's amazing. That's going to be the easy way to say it. She's an accomplished author. She has a number of books out there. She got her career started in branding, and I'm not gonna take too many of your slides, Lita, because you've got this. But she's from Colorado, but she had this point in her career where she said, you know what I'm doing to help C-level and C-suite executives, there is a whole universe, a whole group of people that can really benefit from that well, and that is servicemen and women. And when I was first introduced, I watched her TED Talk. I'm like, what a dynamic individual with a tremendous message. So today I am pleased to introduce Lita to you. Now, at the very end, we're going to have an opportunity for questions. So as you think through this, use the chat feature. I know there's a Q&A feature here as well, but please, we're going to use the chat feature for that. So questions that you have, and we're going to take all those at the end. So if you want to put them in as you think about them, that's great. If you want to save them to the end, that's great. But we are going to address them at the end. So without further ado, please help me welcome Lita Citroen. Lita?
Thank you so much, Farron. And thank you to everyone at Disney for making this conversation important and a priority. Because today we're talking about you, the veterans, the military spouses, the military allies who make up the Disney family, and what you can do to really grow your career, not just post-military, but at Disney. Before I start any program like this, I want to give a heartfelt thanks to those of you who have worn our nation's cloth, to the spouses who have supported somebody who served in our wonderful United States military. I enjoy freedom as a patriotic American because of your service and sacrifice to our nation. So before I go any further, I first want to say thank you. If we can go to the next slide. Farron sort of alluded to this, but I'll actually tell you the story quickly of how I came to find all of you. I'm a civilian, 100%. My parents came from other countries, so we didn't have any connection to the military here. I didn't know anyone who had served. But in 2009, actually November 9, 2009, I got invited to a Denver Broncos football game. Now, I am a diehard Denver Broncos football fan, but the team that year was kind of like the team we've had in recent years, so tickets weren't hard to come by. But November 9, 2009 happened to be the week of Veterans Day. And the team did something at halftime that literally changed my life. They brought some Fort Carson soldiers onto the field at halftime to talk to the fans about what it's like to exit the military. And they said things like, I don't know how to sell myself. I don't know how to tell people who haven't been through what I've been through, what I can bring, what I can offer. I don't know what a post-military career is supposed to look like. And in that moment, I realized that everything I had been doing when I was in corporate as I had started my own company a year earlier, everything I had been doing had been helping people with those exact problems, but not military. And so I decided I wanted to help. And I found that it wasn't as easy as I had hoped. I knocked on a lot of doors trying to find ways that I could contribute what we're going to talk about today. And there was resistance because being a civilian, it's obvious I don't know what you've been through. And so there's a little bit of hesitancy. But I was given an opportunity to teach service disabled veterans that were going into Wall Street jobs the program we're going to talk about today. And it was game changing. It was game changing for me and it was game changing for them. And if we can go to the next slide, what ended up happening over the next few years is I have written several books on this topic. My third book just actually came out. My military book came out in October, and it's a military transition book. My TED Talk, which I'm super proud of because I was speaking for all of you when I stood on that red dot at TED. And I've done a lot of media because there's so much misunderstanding, miscommunication. As a civilian, I didn't know what I didn't know. I was asking the wrong questions. I was probing and pushing in the wrong ways. And you all were meeting me there and saying, here's what you need to know. So what I'm going to share with you today, when I speak about your experience, it's certainly not from firsthand knowledge, but it is from speaking and coaching and mentoring and writing for thousands upon thousands of you. I hear from you every day that these are the concerns that are important. These are the opportunities you don't quite know how to pursue. And when we layer all of that within the wonderful, magical environment of Disney, there's so much richness. But I'm going to hopefully share with you the steps to making that happen. That's my commitment for today. So let's go to the next slide and I'll get started with some of the truths that I have found in the years since 2009 that I have been working alongside of you. First, we have very different ways of speaking about ourselves. As a civilian, I have no trouble telling you what makes me great. I can list off my accomplishments. I could even recite my resume frontwards and backwards, and I'll do it with a big smile on my face and my shoulders back. But that's different for somebody coming out of the military, because as Farron was mentioning, there's that culture of service before self. And that value, that culture, which is amazing, means you don't take fame, you don't take credit for what you do in the military. You're supposed to take accountability and responsibility, but not the recognition that comes along with that. You match that up with your civilian counterparts who are more comfortable talking about themselves and using the word I and self-promotion. And there's already a crack in the career path, because in order to get you more comfortable with self-promotion, we do have to talk about this concept of branding. Now, I'll tell you, I'm not going to teach you how to brag or be arrogant. That's not what this is about. But it is about using first person a little bit more so that when those opportunities for upward mobility in the organization or more contribution or leadership roles present, that you're in a position to speak about yourself confidently. Now, we know that the military career path, as has already been mentioned, is more predictable. It's more standardized. It's understood. You know what it looks like from the first day of basic training. In the civilian sector, all bets are off. All bets are off. We call job titles different things. We don't have an MOS that you can look at and figure out where you are in the system. Everything is different. So your ability to grow your career, especially in an organization like Disney, is going to fall a lot on you. And that's why we're focused on the concept of how do you bring your value proposition forward? How do you create a career path for yourself? Working with internal stakeholders, working with mentors and sponsors to make sure that you are right there at those opportunities that are going to help you help the organization and ultimately give you that satisfaction you should have. Now, the uniform is an interesting piece of transition, and I've never worn a uniform. So when it was first sort of explained to me what it means to wear a military uniform, I admit I didn't quite understand. But as I understand it now, everything in your military career is displayed on your chest, your shoulders, and your collar. You walk into a room, your rank, the hierarchy is immediately established. There's no question about where you rank and where I rank. But in the civilian sector, we don't have that, right? I have clients in the technology field that honestly, if you saw them on the street, you might think they're homeless people, and they're running billion-dollar tech companies because their uniform, if you will, is a very anti-corporate appearance. So we're not giving you the training that says when you take that uniform off and you come into an organization like Disney, whether you're working at parks or animation or cruises or wherever you are in the corporate structure, how do you present yourself physically? What is that presence going to look like? And I'll tell you, if you've struggled with this, you are not alone. Because I would say 9 out of 10 people that I coach today have mentioned that knowing how to present themselves in their wardrobe and their body language is a big concern. But ultimately, it comes down to choice. It comes down to choice. And every month for about 7 years now, I have been teaching in the TAP program at the United States Air Force Academy. Happens to be down the street from where I live in Colorado. And every month, right before I come in and talk about personal branding, the audience has done an exercise. Maybe you did this when you went through TAP. The exercise is, what are you most excited about in your transition? And what are you most anxious about? Right? 2 sides of a piece of paper. Every single month, I take a picture of that sheet because every single month, the same concept shows up on both sides. What are you most excited about in leaving the Air Force? I get to choose what I wear. I can choose whatever kind of work I want to do. I can choose what time I wake up in the morning. What are you most anxious about? I don't know what to wear. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And what time do you need me to get up? It's this idea of choice. And as Americans, we say, thank you for your service and the world is your oyster. Go out and do whatever you want. And if you don't come from a career that has had a ton of choice, because things have been more standardized and predictable, that can feel a little bit disarming. So we're going to talk about these concepts and unpack them a little bit more here. But these are some of the things that the thousands upon thousands of men and women who've worn the uniform have shared with me. So if there are things going on in the back of your mind, you're in good company. Let's go to the next slide. It is an amazing time to be a veteran at Disney. I mean, Farron listed off some of the amazing opportunities, right? The Bergs like Salute, where you're going to be able to connect with civilian allies who are passionate about military service, military spouses. You're going to find people who look like you, who have similar experiences. Diversity and inclusion being so prominent right now means it's about multiple colors and conversations and interests and backgrounds. And that's what makes companies like Disney so rich and powerful in terms of an example for other companies. The opportunity to get mentoring, to get those transition tools that the Bergs and that the other parts of Heroes Work Here are offering to help you grow your career. It is a fantastic time, not only to be in the civilian sector, but to be a veteran at Disney. And hopefully, as we go through this program, you'll start to see how some of those opportunities can really help you advance your career as you grow in your leadership role within the organization. I'll go to the next slide. So I'm using this term brand. And you might think you know what a brand is, right? You work for probably one of the biggest brands we have in the world. It's very recognizable. But let me just kind of step back and explain what a brand really is. I spent 20 years of my career before I started my own company building brands, company brands, product brands, services brands, always matching that up with the executive, the leadership brand. And a brand actually is not a logo or a color palette or a jingle. A brand is a feeling. A brand is a feeling, an expectation of an experience. A brand makes us feel something. So when we see the Walt Disney Company logo, we feel nostalgic and happy and magical, and we leave all of our worries behind. That's the feeling that brand is designed to elicit in us. Marketing is very different than branding. Marketing is where we take that feeling and we distribute it to a specific target audience. people who will buy or interact with our product, our company, or our service. And it's important that we understand this because a lot of times what we're doing is we're jumping into the marketing and we're creating online profiles and we're putting resumes together and we're trying to assert our value without first establishing what do we want people to believe about us? How do we want them to feel? When you walk into a room, what do you want that experience to look like? That's branding, and that comes first. So in our conversation today, we're going to do the heavy lifting first, and I'm going to walk you through how to build that brand. And then we'll wrap up with how that brand gets marketed inside the organization and externally. So we'll go to the next slide. When I shifted from corporate branding into personal branding, it was about 2008. And I realized that the concepts and even the methodology I'm going to share with you, it's actually very simple. There's no rocket science involved in any of what we're going to talk about. It's simple, but it's not easy because even in the short time we have together, I'm going to ask you some questions and get you to think about some things that might make you uncomfortable. And I do that because you have to be an expert on you. You have to be able to set that expectation that you want people to feel about you in order to drive that conversation, in order to build that reputation. The branding, if you think about it, the branding is what you do and the reputation is what you earn. So it's a simple process, but it's not easy. It's also about perception and judgment. And I get it that as soon as we see those words or we hear about judgment and biases and perception, it feels so unfair. People shouldn't judge. And I remember telling my sons when they were little, it doesn't matter what other people think about you. It just matters what's in your heart. And I was half right, because we should feel that we're valuable and worthy and loved, right? What's in our heart is important. But what we've learned is it also matters what other people think about us, how they perceive us. And there's a lot of room for improvement there. But perception does matter, because if I perceive you to be difficult or non-collaborative, or all you do is talk about war stories, that might limit the opportunities I want to offer you. That might limit the advancement I want to give you within the company because of that perception. And that perception might be wrong. It might be based on misinformation or my own biases. But we have to understand perception, and we have to appreciate that it's real and it occurs every day. Now, when I say personal branding makes you not generic, I'll give you an example. So if I went to the grocery store and I was looking for laundry detergent, and I didn't care, liquid, powder, pod, doesn't matter to me. I just need laundry detergent. How would I typically buy? Right? I would buy on price, because if they all do the same thing, I'm going to go for the cheapest thing, right? But on the other hand, if I go down that laundry detergent aisle and I see that orange container and I know that brand, and I remember instantly my mother doing laundry when I was a little girl in Southern California, and birds would be outside singing and she'd have a white apron on and cookies were baking. And if you knew my mother, you'd know what a stretch this is, but go with me. And I'm flooded with all these warm and loving feelings because she cared so much about making sure our clothes were clean. And that's the kind of mother and wife I want to be. I want my husband and my sons to go out into the world with the cleanest, most confident appearance they can have. I would never compromise their love and their safety for a couple of dollars. There's no comparison in products. Well, is that an emotional decision, or is that a logical decision to choose Tide over another brand? It's purely emotional, because I'm not turning the packages around and comparing ingredients. I don't know what those words mean, but I have feelings attached to a product, and I am willing to spend more for that product. As their target customer, I'm spending more because that perception of value creates more of an experience. So how does that relate to people? Well, let's say Stephen and Kevin are going up for the same position at Disney. On paper, Stephen and Kevin's resume looks almost identical. Same years of military service, same decorations and accomplishments during their time in the military. same career at Disney. They've tracked almost side by side. They have the same certifications, same skills. Turning the packages around, they almost look identical. But here's what we know about Kevin. When we interviewed him for this leadership role at Disney, he talked about being a mentor. He talked about what it meant to be a lead cast member, what it meant to bring others up and help others in their journey, what it meant to be an external face of the organization. I mean, he talked with such passion and such commitment. Now, we didn't get that same message from Stephen. And if we were trying to make a decision for somebody in a leadership role, Kevin's ability to articulate that value proposition, his dreams, his passion, his commitment and connection to our mission, our dreams, our values, that could set him apart enough that all other things considered equal, Kevin would get the job. And he might even get paid more for it. Value comes in the perception of the benefits over cost. And we make decisions on two things. We act on logic, we need to hire a leader, but we buy on emotion. We buy on the feelings, the beliefs, the perception that somebody brings to the table. And this is all about control. This is all about knowing what levers you have access to, where the opportunities are, what you can control and what you can't. Because let's face it, we can't control other people, but we can influence, inspire, and impact the way they are going to perceive us. And that's why personal branding matters so much. If you are competing off of a skill set which is commoditized or generic, meaning a lot of people are going to have that, that isn't enough of a differentiation. So I want to show you how to have control. And in just a moment, I'm going to unpack that one for you. We'll go to the next slide. So this is where the process starts. Very simple formula. Values plus action equals credibility. Pretty simple, but really not easy. Because in order to build a brand that you will be trusted for, that people will give you credibility towards, that you will get credit for, it starts with values. Now, I'll bet if we were all in the room together and I said, what are some of your values? Those of you who've served in the military would raise your hand and offer up honor, integrity, duty, service, commitment, military values, right? And that makes perfect sense. Those values attracted you into a career, whether it was 4 or 40 years in the military, because those values spoke to you. But now I'm asking you about your values as an individual, as a person. What do you believe in? What is part of your moral fiber, your moral operating system, such that anytime you have to make a go, no-go decision, is that right? Is that wrong? Do I go forward? Do I stop? You're drawing upon these things called values. And when we have this conversation, often what gets muddled in there are, again, military values, or your parents' values, your community's values, your employer's values. Disney's very upfront about their values, and that's wonderful. Again, you were attracted to those values because they probably aligned very closely with yours. But what are your values? The foundation of a personal brand starts with understanding your values, but those values have to be shown. We have to see proof. We have to see that you walk the talk to those values. For instance, if you tell me your value is honesty, all the time you will always give an honest answer, then I should be able to see evidence through your action that there have been some tough times where you've had to be honest because it was that important to you. That's when I will start seeing you in that way that is truthful and give you credibility. But here's where the formula gets even trickier. Many of you are doing the action. You're already living your values, but you're not connecting them. You're not making that connection. So I understand why you're doing the work you're doing, and I can give you credibility for it. I'll give you an example using myself. My values were very clearly aligned with wanting to serve those who've served. 2 values I anchor into: gratitude and generosity. When I found out that you all weren't being taught this, and I saw an opportunity to be generous with my experience and my knowledge to show my gratitude, it was a slam dunk. but I had zero credibility because I hadn't done anything. It wasn't until I started closing my business down and traveling to conferences and paying my own way so I could speak in front of audiences, or traveling to military bases, or writing articles for free, or coaching anyone who reached out and said, I'm stuck, that the action matched the value. But I had to take it one step further, and so do you. I have to connect them. I have to tell people why I do this. So I start off every presentation by saying, I am here because I am a proud American who is grateful for your service to our nation. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding or confusion about why I'm here. And that's the part that gets tricky for you, because that's where we start to talk about self-promotion. So understand the formula. It takes a lot to unpack, but it really is where this all starts. Let's go to the next slide. Every single one of you has something called a current personal brand. Every single one of you watching this has a brand. You are known for certain qualities and experiences and perceptions. Maybe those are experiences and perceptions that make you unique. Maybe we know what you're passionate about and how you want to serve and what your goals are. But the important thing of understanding current brand is that you already have one. And this is the baseline. So when we look at current brand, all we're doing is inventorying where am I right now? Maybe I've never heard of this concept before and I haven't paid attention. Where am I right now in terms of reputation? And I'll share in a moment how you can get some feedback on that. But it really is about understanding, we can't go back and change history, but you can start here and work forward if you understand where you're starting from. Let's go to the next slide. But I told you this was a program about control. And this is where you get control. How do you want your reputation to look? How do you want people to experience you? What promise are you sending about what it's going to feel like to be led by you, to work with you, to serve alongside of you? How do you want me to feel when your name pops up in my inbox, or your name comes up for a promotion, or you walk into a room and are about to lead a meeting? How do you want people to feel? And one of the ways that we accomplish this is to literally fast forward all the way to the end. And if it feels more comfortable, think about the end of your career. But you can also think about the end of your life and imagine what legacy will you leave behind? I work with a lot of executives who are later in their career. They don't have as much runway ahead of them to make all these differences. But the one thing they all say is, I don't care about the size of the company I built. I don't care about how many people I employed or what our stock price was. I want people to know that I always had their back, or I always put their needs first, or I was always truthful. I gave them the real picture. Whatever those values are, that's where the feelings are. And brand is all about feelings. So here's why this gives you control. Because if you can imagine what the end looks like, if you can imagine what your ideal end state, your desired reputation is, then you work your way backwards. And from this point forward, you move into that direction. So if a choice comes up, an opportunity, a challenge, you now have a lighthouse to move towards that says, how would somebody who's like that respond? Will I raise my hand? Will I keep quiet? Will I share my opinion? Will I hold back? Will I offer help, or will I only look out for myself? Those are decisions you get to make because you now have a vision of what you want the end to look like. It's a powerful exercise. I get it. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. Nobody likes to think about the day that they leave this world. But at that point, we don't have a chance to do anything about it. You have a chance right now. You're in an organization that wants you to be fulfilled and bring your whole authentic self to work every single day, to find multiple opportunities to express your passion and fulfill your desired brand and legacy while you're here. What a better place to unpack some of this. It's not easy, but it is certainly worth it. So let's move forward. Next slide, please. we've talked about you up to this point, right? Because it's your personal brand, but your brand has to be relevant to a specific target audience. And for many of us, our target audience are the teams we interact with, maybe our supervisor, our external stakeholders, people we're connected to on LinkedIn. But the people we focus on for a target audience are the people who have an opportunity that can help us, right? They can advance us, they can endorse us, they can mentor and guide us, they can hire us, they can promote us. These are our target audiences. If you're in a sales position, you know your target audience is probably a potential customer and an existing customer. Maybe it's even a vendor. But we can have multiple target audiences, just like a product would have multiple target audiences, but we don't have hundreds. So I encourage you to start narrowing down who are the primary and secondary target audiences that you're going to focus on building this brand with. We'll go to the next slide. Because every human being has two sets of needs. So if you think back to that laundry detergent example, we can advance it just a little bit. If we have functional needs. So if I go to the grocery store looking for laundry detergent, my functional need is I need laundry detergent. I need something to clean my clothes, right? That's why we put things like job descriptions and resumes together, because we can sort of check the box on what we need to know about a product or a person to satisfy the functional needs that we have. Let's go to the next slide. But what's really cool, and what you probably already guessed, will advance it, is that every single one of us has emotional needs. We need to feel something. In my example of Kevin and Stephen, they were equally qualified to perform a specific role, but we've had a different feeling from Kevin. We didn't get that feeling from Stephen, not because he may not have it, but he didn't bring that. He didn't share that. So it's important to recognize that each of these people that you're interacting with, that you're trying to build relationship with, you're building your career with, they need to know things, but they also need to feel things. And this is where we sometimes miss the mark, because all we do is focus on checking boxes, delivering on time, on budget, making sure that, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But we forget there's a real human being there who needs to feel something. And I'll let you in on a secret. In all the years I've been working with military talent, you all are much better equipped to do this than I am. I had to learn this, but in your military training, you were taught how to read people, how to sort of fill in the gaps, how to see beyond, how to look around a corner. That's what we're talking about here. Remember, these are human beings you're interacting with. And if there's friction, if there's discord, if there's tough conversations, sometimes it's an emotional connection that's missing. Step back, see how you can meet those needs, and watch the relationship thrive. Next slide. But oftentimes we don't know how far apart or how close together we are on our current brand versus our desired. So one of the ways that we do that, and one of the ways that we figure out what our target audience needs, is through this idea of feedback. Now, big organizations, I'm sure you're used to performance evaluations. Maybe you're even doing 360s, and you're getting feedback on your performance and your work style and your work relationships. But I'm going a little bit outside of that, and I'm talking about how people perceive you. And as much as we don't remember to think about judgment, their perception feels real to them. So if I say, Stephen, I think you're kind of pushy, Stephen might think that I'm completely wrong, but my perception could be affecting opportunities. So understand that. But as you get feedback, and I'm talking any kind of feedback, whether you're proactive about it or you hear it around the water cooler, as you get feedback, ask yourself, will that feedback get me towards my desired reputation, the legacy I'm working towards, or can I ignore it? Can I ignore it? I mean, I get a lot of feedback on my driving. I do not act on all of it. But if somebody tells me that I wasn't relatable, or I didn't act generous, or I wasn't compassionate, that would absolutely be feedback I would act on, because the worst thing that could happen is to keep falling into those blind spots. And then I'm not making progress towards my desired brand. So feedback is actually a gift, because it does move us closer to our desired reputation. Next slide, please. Wow, we have covered a lot in a pretty short amount of time. And I'm sure your thoughts are swirling and you've got ideas and maybe you're struggling to make things connect. And how does this apply to marketing, which we're about to get to? But I have one more favor to ask of you. If this makes sense and you're with me so far, then I need you to make one agreement. And the agreement isn't with me. It isn't with your manager, your boss, your mentor. The agreement is with yourself. This is only going to get harder. And you have to know you're worth it. You have to put yourself and your brand and your future first. And that means making tough decisions, making bold leaps, being vulnerable, being authentic, sharing when you have an idea, raising your hand when there's a great opportunity, and holding back when you have an opinion that could hurt someone. Because your brand is a living, fluid entity. And who you are and what you stand for is what I will learn as your target audience to assign you opportunity to. You have to be so confident and clear in how you communicate that value. And the tough choices, they're tough for a reason because they strengthen us like diamonds, right? They strengthen us. But if it was all easy, then it wouldn't be worth it. So when you're challenged, when you see something that makes you feel maybe the butterflies are going in your stomach and you're not quite sure, find people who are your allies, find those sponsors and mentors, bring them into the conversation. And if it's fear because this is uncomfortable and you're moving out of your comfort zone, if it aligns with your brand, take that step forward. You've made the biggest step so far, which is leaving the military and joining this sort of, amorphous civilian career. But this is where it gets harder. And trust me, I've been tested many times. There have been wonderful opportunities with really big paychecks, and I've had to turn some of them down because they weren't right for me. I've also leaned into opportunities that scared the bejeezers out of me. But when I did that, I learned more about myself. I was able to help other people and impact a larger community. This is where you make an agreement with yourself. You are worth this. It won't be easy all the time, but it actually does start to become more routine. You don't have to think about, what do I wear? How do I show up on LinkedIn? Can I shake hands with that person in the hallway? Can I offer my opinion? All of that part becomes easy, but the hard stuff is hard for a reason. So I hope you'll make that agreement with yourself. Let's go to the next slide. So we've talked a little bit about some of these roadblocks and opportunities. And I know Farron in his introduction talked about the concept of loyalty. It's an interesting one. And you're in an organization that a lot of people would love to work for, right? Disney is the dream company. And so maybe you're sitting there feeling such a loyalty to the fact that you have this opportunity that showing a desire to advance or showing a desire to work cross-functionally might even feel disloyal, maybe to the person who hired you or to the team that brought you in or the manager you're reporting to. And that's normal. Loyalty in a corporate environment doesn't mean you can't also take care of yourself. It should mean that you're loyal to your employer and that you're living the Disney brand, whether you're at work or in the community. But we want to see you succeed. And so question whether your loyalty is misplaced or whether it's something you can move through. You're going to meet stakeholders. You might have already met them already, and there's stakeholders inside the organization. Maybe you're part of the Salute Group, BRG, and you're already interacting with other stakeholders cross-functionally in other parts of the organization. But you're also going to meet stakeholders out in the community. And these are people who want to support you. They want to help you. Mobility and promotions is very different in the civilian sector. We need to advocate for ourselves and then find people who will be part of our network to help us make that argument, make that position that we are the best candidate for that opportunity. So gather those mentors, gather those stakeholders, help them become part of your personal board of directors, if you want to think about it that way, because self-promotion starts with you. The days of doing good work and keeping your head down and staying in your cubicle and not bothering anyone, that's typically not how people get advanced. So if you see an opportunity, this is where it's your chance to really shine. And we're going to talk about now how some of the self-promotion pieces come together and how you market yourself. Next slide. The first one, which happens to be one of my favorite, is narrative, because narrative is storytelling, right? You work for a storytelling organization, and storytelling of you starts with you. And actually, it starts with what you're telling yourself. Self-talk is one of the most powerful forms of narrative because you actually hear yourself in your own voice. Make sure you're filling your psyche, you're filling your powerful brand with all sorts of positive affirmations. If you catch yourself being negative, here's why it's risky. What you tell yourself actually leaks into what you tell other people. We've all been with that person who's trying to convince us of something that we can tell they don't even believe themselves. And the risk there is what you tell other people actually becomes what they tell other people when you're not around. So imagine how powerful it is if you're telling yourself that you have this, you're worth it, you've got the skills, you're the right person, and then you communicate that to someone else who feels that energy and that passion and that commitment, and then tell somebody else about it. Now imagine the cascade effect of that. That's why narrative is so important. Next slide. But narrative is your story. And the military experience that you had, which we are so grateful for, is part of your story. It isn't your whole story. So I ask you to consider whether you're bringing those stories into a civilian conversation. If all of the examples you're bringing forward, for instance, had to do with when you were deployed or when you were in uniform or when you had this challenge that the rest of us maybe can't relate to, that could be depreciating your story and your narrative. Make sure your narrative talks about your military experience in the context of how it makes you who you are today and what that means in terms of going forward. That's a really tight, concise, and consistent way of promoting who you are. The past becomes the present and promises something in the future. Next slide. So one of the things we do often when we meet somebody new, or maybe you're on a Zoom call and everybody's going around introducing themselves, is we give something called an elevator pitch or an elevator speech. It's a quick way of introducing ourselves. And typically what you might do is give your name. If it's a military context, you might describe your military service, and you might say what role you fit in the organization and which division of Disney you work for. But here's a little different way of doing it. I would definitely encourage you, if you're in the organization or you're in a military context, or even if you're just standing in line for a cup of coffee, when somebody turns around and says, "Oh, tell me about you," tell them what you do in a way that isn't overly convoluted, right? Because maybe they don't have an understanding of how Disney's structured. Maybe they don't understand your military experience. And then tell them what makes you different. What's your why? Why are you passionate about the work you do? If you still have a few seconds, paint them a picture. Tell me a story. Give me a day in the life of. That is such a richer way to introduce yourself than name, rank, and serial number, right? Which a civilian isn't going to understand. We're much more flowery in our language. So listen for this in other people and see if you can't adapt it for yourself. Next slide, please. Some really good practices, since most of us are doing a lot of this by Zoom and by webcam, is show some excitement when you introduce yourself. We're talking about you. This is a subject you should know pretty well. And try to be concise. When somebody starts their elevator pitch by going to the beginning of their life and going through every step, I am pushing every button on that elevator because now I'm feeling trapped, right? We didn't ask you for your life story. We just asked you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and make sure you show interest in other people. This is something civilians are taught how to do, right? Relationships go back and forth. Next slide. What you want to make sure you don't do is just list off your job description or your resume. Watch that military jargon, right? If you're talking a lot of acronyms and lingo and jargon, the civilian who's listening has no idea what you're talking about. And we want to be respectful, but now we're confused. And watch those war stories. For many of us, I know for myself, when I first started working with you all I knew was what I'd seen on TV or in movies. That was my context. I didn't know anyone who was a veteran. So watch those war stories, watch those examples, and especially those graphic examples. Introducing yourself is a great way to bring your brand forward. Next slide. But we also do this thing called networking. And your network, I get it. Coming out of the military, it might feel like a dirty word, but networking in our world is how we get ahead. It's the people who know us. It's the relationships that we curate strategically and intentionally, because not only does it reward us with something, but we can return the favor. So if I'm networking with someone, if all I'm doing is providing them with guidance and tools and introductions and leads and coaching, well, that's kind of more sales than it is networking. But if I'm getting something out of it, now we have a reciprocal relationship. And these are the people who are your board of directors. These are the people who want to help you navigate those roadblocks inside the company and in your career. Next slide. These are the people who are going to be able to bring information to you. If we can go to the next slide, please. They're going to bring information to you, and they're going to bring support. They're going to advocate and make those introductions. The same thing we do in person is what we're doing online. Your online reputation should be strategically another form of networking, because really that's what we're doing. And even though you're inside an organization, right? Some people have this belief that, well, I'll do all that social media stuff when I need to find a job. That's not necessarily true, because everyone you're connected to inside the organization, they're probably online too. And what if they're surfing around looking at who you are online while they're waiting for a meeting to start, right? This is the same thing. So being online and having an online reputation means you're authentic. You're the same person. Not perfect, because personal branding is not about being perfect, but it's absolutely about being consistent, being authentic. Looking for those relationships, looking for ways that we can benefit someone else and that person can benefit us. But social networking and being online can take a lot of time. So it's important to be focused. If you're in a career path that has a mobility focus, make sure that what you're promoting at work, in your conversations, in your interviews, is supported with what I find online. And just remember, in case you didn't know this, nothing you're posting online or even email or direct messaging is private. It's always public. And we just have to believe that. There's too many examples I could share with you. Next slide. But one of the biggest ways that we can build our brand, and one of the biggest tools that we have to be able to promote ourselves inside the organization and externally, is through a tool called LinkedIn. And when LinkedIn first started, admittedly, it was a place you went to look for a job. So if your boss found you on LinkedIn, that was not a good sign. But now your boss, your colleagues, your vendors, your external stakeholders, everybody's on LinkedIn. And we're using LinkedIn to tell people more about us. So imagine you're going up for a job promotion, a lateral move, cross-functional move, whatever. And somebody says, I've got his resume and I've kind of seen what his interview notes say. I'm going to go see what he says on LinkedIn. It's a wonderful way to let them learn more about you, kind of like a mini website. Next slide, please. So the first thing we look at when we see somebody's LinkedIn is their profile picture. And yes, these are real LinkedIn profile pictures. I hope I never have any of these 4 people in one of my audiences. We want your profile picture to show us who you are. So if you've been out of the military, I shouldn't expect to see you in combat gear, and especially not with a big, scary gun, because most civilians don't understand. No animals, no wedding pictures, no back of your head. You might think it's funny, but it's really confusing. Next slide. What we want to see is a picture of what you look like today. And these are three people dear to my heart. One of them might look familiar to you, Kevin Preston there on the left. In the middle is Katie Haddock, a colonel from the Army, and then Lieutenant Colonel Chris Ford. The day I coached Lieutenant Colonel Ford out of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and out of the military into his civilian career, he changed that picture from a uniform picture to a civilian picture. If you're still active duty, if you're in the reserves, it can be appropriate to have your uniformed picture up there. But if you're not, if you've been out of the military for a while, it might be confusing why I'm seeing a uniformed picture for somebody who works at Disney. Next slide, please. Also pay attention to the banner that you get up top. And it's wonderful to put a family picture. It's wonderful to put something you found on Google. But here's the thing, we don't get to borrow pictures from Google. So make sure you have the rights to it. If you have the rights to a Disney photo that you're permitted to use, absolutely. If you want to be proud of your employer, put that photo up there. If your team or your department or your company has rules about what those pictures look like, always defer to that. Pay attention too to what you're saying under your name, because that tells us a little bit about you. So if you've been at Disney for 10 years and the first thing under your name says U.S. Army Colonel, that could be confusing to somebody who might be looking at promoting you. Next slide, please. But this is my favorite section of LinkedIn, and that's the About section, because this is where you tell me your story. This is where you get to use narrative and language and descriptors and bullet points and all of this to say who you are, thinking about who you were in the military and what was so significant and meaningful, how that makes you the person you are today in your role at Disney and the way that you're growing your career and what you look forward to in the future. Think about keywords, make sure you're paying attention to the keywords that matter to your team and your employer. But this is the best section on LinkedIn, and so many of you are leaving it out. So let's see if we can't get some of those About sections done. Next slide, please. And finally, we're going to wrap it up. There's 3 builds here. We're going to wrap it up with your image and style, because presence matters. And right now we're doing all of it through a computer, right? We're meeting behind webcams, but the day will come soon, hopefully, where we are going to be back in person. And how you carry yourself, the confidence that you use to present yourself and the choices that you're making about wardrobe and accessories, and the fact you're not wearing a uniform anymore means you're choosing all that. Make sure you respect yourself enough to pay attention to this. And as long as it's consistent with what I believe to be true about you, then we move forward in the conversation. When it's inconsistent, that's when we start building skepticism. Next slide, please. Oh, we have talked about a lot in a very short period of time, and I know you probably have a ton of questions, and I'm excited to get to them. But before I leave you for questions and answers, I just want to remind you, this starts with your values. This starts with what you stand for. Spend the time, invest in yourself, really dig into what makes you you. And if you can, separate out the values that have been taught to you by people who probably cared and meant well, but those don't have to be your values. Define them for yourself. Understand what your brand looks like today. Everyone has a reputation. What is the perception that people have of you today? Look at some tools and even things like gossip or feedback or anecdotal information that says this is how people perceive me. Maybe that's where some of the roadblocks are coming from. But it's all about future. It's all about that desired reputation, the way that you want to be remembered. Because let's face it, we're all on the same assembly line, right? And the clock's ticking in the same way. So we want to make sure we have a chance to make that difference. We want to affect the way people perceive us today, so we're remembered in the right way. Understand your target audience. They're all different, and they're unique and quirky and complicated, and that's what makes them so fun. So think about what they need, not just what they need to know about you, but how do they need to feel about you? Match that up and watch your success rate go through the roof. Commit to yourself, make that agreement, because there's one of you and it's exactly what the world needs. It's exactly what Disney needs. Commit to yourself to being authentic and real and genuine and powerful and growing your career and living your legacy. Last slide, please. And I'm here today because from the bottom of my heart, I am so grateful for your service. One story I sometimes share is that my mother was actually raised in communist Hungary. And when she came to this country, she taught us at a young age that freedom doesn't come for free. And I have the most wonderful life as an American. I am proud. I am a patriot. And it's because of the service and sacrifice of people like you in your family that I owe a debt of gratitude. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your service. I'm excited to see what questions that you have. I'm going to bring Farron back on to see what we have to talk about next, but thank you very much.
Oh, Lita, thank you. That was awesome. I got a ton out of that. Some really great stuff. So just questions are starting to come in. And again, folks, please put those in the chat and we'll get those to Lita. So one I have for you is, there's feedback. You talked a lot about that, but how do I know it's working? Because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of steps, and it's like, I want to make sure, and I think whether this is military or civilian, am I doing it right? I want to make sure of that. So what is that check and balance?
Well, it's a fabulous question, right? Because this is going to take a lot of work. And what are the results? So I think we look at what our goal is, right? If you're trying to build more credibility, if you're trying to be positioned as leadership material, if there are certain words that you want people to start assigning to you, when you start hearing those words as you're being introduced, or somebody says, yeah, I was referred to you, and Farron said that you're a very generous and grateful person. Bingo, those are my words, right? When the connections that you're getting on LinkedIn, when the opportunities you're starting to find yourself invited to, when the resources that you're asking for start happening more, those are indicators that it's working. When those roadblocks keep presenting, that's an indication that maybe we need to go back and go through the process again. Maybe you haven't been as clear about what those values are. Maybe you aren't telling people why those values matter to you. So go back through the process again and see if you get a different result. But it all depends on what your goal is.
That's really great.
Thanks.
Now, you mentioned LinkedIn, and one of the questions we got is, in the military, they were taught, keep your social media presence to a minimum, don't put it out there. As you said, nothing's private. The phrase I always heard about is social media is written in ink. It's hard to erase it. It's always out there. So the question is, and really seeking advice, they struggle with disclosing information on social media. How much is it enough? How much is too much?
Oh, and that is such a real question, right? And for years I've been teaching this, and there was a time when it was very risky, and maybe it is still risky to list yourself as active duty or prior military on social media. The choice, it's always about, choice, right? So what are the costs? What are the benefits? And the beauty of social media, especially a tool like LinkedIn, is you can disclose as much as you feel comfortable with. Now, there are certain jobs because of security clearances that will literally tell you no social media. That's a protocol that we're not talking about here. But for those of us that are looking to be found, are looking to amplify the voice that we have in the office and the way that we're known, we only have to put out there what we are comfortable sharing. So I might look like I'm sharing a lot because I'm very active on social media. It is like built for my personality, but there's a lot I don't share. And I make that choice consciously. I want people to see my background so that they can find opportunities for synergy, or they can find a way to start a conversation with me by pointing out something that we might have in common. But I don't have to disclose every fear, every, emotion that I have. And so I feel like a lot of what I'm experiencing from people that are resistant is this, it feels like a slippery slope. Once I open that door, can I really keep it sort of wedged closed? And yes, you can. So weigh the benefits against the cost. If you're in a visible role and it's important that people know more about your background or can see testimonials, I mean, the recommendation feature on LinkedIn is unbelievable because sometimes those are things you wouldn't feel comfortable saying about yourself, but other people can say it. And so you've got like references posted with people who are actual LinkedIn users with their title and their job history. So there's a lot of credibility that comes from that. But you don't have to disclose personal information or make yourself too vulnerable, because once you do, you've made that public.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. I love this next question. So, I'm just going to read it verbatim. Is there an exercise that can help me carve out my personal values from the values that I've lived for a 30-year career in the Army?
Wow. Oh, it's funny because an exercise that I use, and I've modified it for corporate, actually came from someone who told me they did this exercise in warrant officer training school. And the exercise is you take like 20 Post-it notes, put them all down in front of you, write a value on each one of them, something that you believe, right? A value that is fundamental to who you are. Don't overscript where it came from, but write one on each piece of these notes in front of you, and then remove 10. So now you have 10 in front of you. Look at them. Do you need to clarify them? Do they need to be drilled down a little bit? And then remove 5. And do that until you have 3 in front of you that feel so foundational to who you are that you couldn't have those 3 values stripped away and still be you, right? I shared gratitude and generosity. Well, I have other values. I mean, there's a lot. I'm a pretty complicated person. So I have a lot of values, but the 2 that I really want to be known for are the fact that I am so grateful for everything I get and everything I get to do. And I use that gratitude to be generous with all different kinds of people. That's what I want to be remembered for. But that exercise is one that I use in corporate settings that sometimes really knocks people off their feet because it is really hard. Our parents have been very influential to us, our media, our spouses, our military community. But what does it mean for you? And as you see those 3, drill down as deep as you can into what those words mean, because you'd have to be able to back them up.
That's awesome. I'm going to do that. I like that. So here's kind of a question that goes around stereotypes or conscious or unconscious bias. And there's a belief that veterans are, these assertive, aggressive type A people, which as the individual that asks the question, they say, therefore, I am very reticent to try to step out too, early, too soon for promotion, because they don't want people to think, oh, it's the aggressive guy. It's a person driving forward or aggressive. And I use guy as a gender neutral term, as we do in Iowa. Sorry, but it's the it's that of course they're going to do that because they're this hard driving veteran. So how do you balance that?
And usually the question is, how do you self-promote without being arrogant, right? Because we all want to be large and in charge. Command and control, the leadership style from the military. I work with a lot of employers, and one of the biggest fears they have is if they hire a veteran, that person's going to walk around giving orders using knife hands, right? Or they're just going to sit and wait to be told what to do. And in the years I've been working with y'all, nothing could be farther from the truth, right? Because you are some of the most creative, innovative, passionate, goal-oriented people I've ever met. You just have a military career behind you that's very different. So I would be careful projecting biases in what that almost could sound like is confirmation bias, right? I'm afraid they're going to see me as too aggressive if I go for a promotion. So I'm going to hold back, and then it's confirmed that I shouldn't go for a promotion, right? That's not what we want. But making sure that you have the relationships in place, because a promotion isn't just about putting your hand up, but it's making sure that you have the relationships, you have the credibility, you have the experience, because a company like Disney is going to promote on predictability, right? So we believe that in this new role, you will be able to advance and grow into that position. So we want to make sure that other things are all in place, and get some coaching, get some in-house mentors who can say, it is a little bit premature. Give it a little bit longer, build some of those relationships, make sure that you've got those sponsors in the organization. Maybe there's some more skills you could build while you're in your current job. And when the time is right, you're going to have to be confident. You're going to have to be confident. And it's going to be expected that you'll be confident, not arrogant and not aggressive, but confident. When you're asked the question, why you, going back to my very first point, that you're able to speak in first person and say, here's why what I've done in my past has brought me to this opportunity, and here's what I can do going forward. That's got to come from you, and you have to project it with confidence, not arrogance, but confidence. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it did. And actually, I've got two. I'm going to merge these next two questions into one, because it's a little bit of a tangent off this. It's as serving in the military, they knew their place. I knew when to speak, when to lead, when to be quiet, when to do this. And also, I also was very confident in my expertise, whatever that is within the military world. And it's hard to find their voice in the civilian world. This individual's been at Disney for 5 years, and they feel very competent in their role at Disney and feel like they're becoming an expert. However, they still feel a little reluctant to speak up in this world. So it's that switch from, I was an expert in the military world, all good. I'm really starting to become an expert in the civilian world, but I don't feel confident to speak up yet.
And, that's not a military problem specifically. I mean, we find that across organizations, across every demographic, right? Because when you speak up, you're making yourself vulnerable. They could reject you. They could ridicule you. They could dismiss you. I mean, there's so many tapes that play when we're about to make ourselves vulnerable. But we also know that until we take the risk, there's the opportunity for reward is less, right? Just sitting there and doing good work is not how people get ahead. It is about taking those chances. And if you raise your hand and what comes out wasn't what you meant to say, then it's having the authenticity to take a pause and rephrase, right? And to be confident enough in your value proposition and what you can offer that you're willing to take that chance. It's like somebody who wants to do public speaking. They're always afraid that they're going to look foolish, or that, people are going to see them differently. The audience never wants to see you fail. They want to see you succeed. They're there for a reason. If you're going to contribute in a meeting and you're making yourself a little uncomfortable by raising your hand and going outside your comfort zone, and you've talked to internal mentors and sponsors and gotten some really good guidance about that, then you have to take that chance. And even if it comes out sideways, or there's too many ums, or your body language doesn't match up, the people around the table are looking for you to succeed. And I think reframing it that way gives us permission to be a little bit more real. That makes sense?
It does. That's great. That's great. I love this one. I've had a full career, lots of deployments, lots of time away from home and family. I am very grateful for my job at Disney, but I'm not sure I want to advance. I guess what I'm really saying is I'm enjoying the balance. And is that okay?
I love that. And I don't mean to laugh, because I think it was about 7 years ago that I was teaching at an installation, and I was talking about building a leadership brand and coming out of the military. And one guy raised his hand and he goes, I wish you'd all stop talking about veterans as leaders. He goes, I'm done leading. Like, I just want to go home and play with my kids and build a swimming pool in my backyard. And it stuck with me, because I think that is an assumption that we make, right? You've come out of the greatest leadership institution in the world. I heard General Dempsey say that in New York years ago. And it's so true. Anywhere you go in this world, when you show prior military service, the belief is you have been trained in the greatest leadership institution in the world. That doesn't mean you have to want to be a leader. It doesn't mean you are expected to continue to take on that burden. Now, I will say that many of you don't want to stop serving. So the desire to serve, to give back, to help, to nurture, to grow, that can be a leadership path. Absolutely. And what I've loved about learning more about Disney and preparing for this message today is how much Disney is encouraging that leadership if the desire is there. What we don't want to see is you hold back because of some of these tapes or some of these beliefs that might be restricting your upward mobility. But if you choose to be the best contributor at the level you are and grow your value that way, that is 100% acceptable. And it is people like me going out telling employers that you're all great leaders. That's part of the problem, but that's a pretty good problem to have, I think.
I think we'll take that problem all day long. That's good.
I think so.
That's good. Well, Lita, this has been great. Any parting comments, any last words you want to leave us with?
Just that any of the conversation we've had today that might be bringing up feelings or fears or concerns or questions, or every single person who has heard this message before has had those very same feelings. This is not for the faint of heart, doing what you're doing, but you are in such a wonderful organization that is embracing the whole you and is making it so viable for you to grow a career there. And working with as many companies as I do, I am thrilled to be able to help promote the Disney brand outside of this conversation to let other veterans know just what that opportunity looks like and how much support you really have inside the company. So my hope is that you will take these tools and you will build them and work them and push yourself out of your comfort zone and really work on that desired reputation so that you enjoy it right now.
Lita, that is great. And I just want to say thank you for your time today. Thank you for what you're doing all the time for veterans and those that serve our country. It has been a great hour plus here and really appreciate it. And I do hope everyone that tuned in today and joined us for this got something out of it. For all of you that did tune in, if you are veterans, thank you for what you've done for our country. Thank you for what you're doing for Disney right now. And a special thanks today for Kevin Preston for making this happen, and Doug and Steven behind the scenes for making us look good. So appreciate it, everybody. Have a great day. And again, thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.